The restaurant sat on the corner of a busy street in the heart of the city. It was the kind of place where people came to celebrate big moments, anniversaries, promotions, birthdays, and sometimes just the end of a long week. The walls were painted a deep red, and soft golden lights hung from the ceiling. White tablecloths covered every table, and the smell of fresh bread and roasted meat filled the air every single night. But the thing that made this place truly special was not the food or the fancy decorations. It was the grand piano that sat right in the center of the dining room, polished and gleaming under the warm lights. Every evening, a pianist would come and play beautiful music while guests enjoyed their meals. The sound of the piano floated through the room like a warm breeze, making everything feel a little more magical. People would close their eyes and listen, letting the music wash over them and carry their worries away. It was the heart of the restaurant, and everyone who worked there knew just how important it was. Among the staff was a young woman named Lena. She was 26 years old, with dark hair that she always tied back in a neat bun. Her eyes were the color of warm coffee, and when she smiled, it made people feel instantly welcome. She had been working at the restaurant for 3 years, and in that time, she had become one of the best servers they had ever employed. She remembered every regular customer's favorite dish without writing it down. She knew exactly when to refill a glass of water without being asked. She moved through the crowded dining room with grace, like she had been born to do this job. But there was something about Lena that nobody at the restaurant knew. Something she kept hidden deep inside her heart, locked away where no one could find it. When she was a little girl, Lena had fallen in love with the piano. Her grandmother had an old upright piano in her living room, and Lena would spend hours sitting on the creaky bench, pressing the keys and listening to the sounds they made. Her grandmother noticed her interest and began teaching her simple songs. By the time Lena was 8 years old, she could play better than most adults. Her fingers seemed to dance across the keys without effort, and the music that came out was pure and full of deep feeling. Her parents saw her talent and made great sacrifices to give her lessons with a real teacher. They worked extra hours and saved every penny they could manage. Lena practiced for hours every single day, and by the time she was 16, she had won several competitions in her region. People said she had a rare gift. They said she could go very far in life. She dreamed of playing in grand concert halls, of traveling the world, and sharing her music with thousands of people who would feel what she felt. When she was 18, she got accepted into one of the best music schools in the country. It was everything she had ever wanted and more. She packed her bags, hugged her parents goodbye with tears in her eyes, and left her small hometown to chase her dream. The first 2 years at the school were the happiest of her entire life. She practiced until her fingers ached and her back hurt from sitting. She learned from the best teachers in the field. She made friends who loved music just as much as she did. She was on her way to becoming something truly special, but life has a way of changing plans without any warning at all. In her 3rd year, Lena got a phone call that changed everything she knew. Her father had been in a terrible accident at work. He was alive, thank God, but the doctors said he would never walk again. The medical bills started piling up faster than anyone expected, and her family had no way to pay them all. Her mother was already working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table, and it still was not enough to cover everything. Lena knew in her heart what she had to do. She dropped out of school and went back home to help her family. She found a job at a local diner near her house, working long and exhausting shifts to bring in whatever money she could. She tried to keep playing the piano in her spare time, but there was never any spare time left. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and months slowly turned into years. The dream she had held so close to her heart began to fade like an old photograph. The piano became just a memory, something from another life that no longer seemed to belong to her anymore. When she was 23, she decided to move to the city to find better work and new opportunities. She got the job at the restaurant with the grand piano, and at first, she thought it was some kind of cruel joke from the universe. Every single night, She had to walk past that beautiful instrument. Every single night, she had to listen to someone else play while she carried plates of food to tables full of happy people. It hurt more than she could ever explain to anyone. But Lena was strong. She had learned over the years to push down her feelings and focus on what needed to be done. She told herself that her chapter with music was closed forever. She told herself that it was okay, that not everyone gets to live their dream, and that was just how life worked sometimes. She became very good at pretending she was fine. She smiled at customers, laughed with her coworkers during breaks, and acted like the piano in the middle of the room meant absolutely nothing to her. Only it did mean something to her. It meant everything. Sometimes, when the restaurant was closed for the night and she was the last one cleaning up, she would walk over to the piano and just stand there in the silence. She would look at the black and white keys and remember what it felt like to play them. Her fingers would twitch at her sides, wanting to touch them, wanting to feel that deep connection again, but she never allowed herself to do it. She was afraid that if she started playing, all the pain she had buried so carefully would come rushing back. She was afraid she would not be able to stop herself from crying, so she kept her distance from the instrument she loved. She served her tables with a smile, collected her tips at the end of each night, and went home to her small apartment alone. She called her parents once a week and sent them money whenever she could manage it. Her father was doing better now, learning to live with his new reality and finding small joys again. Her mother had finally been able to quit one of her jobs. Things were getting easier for her family, but the weight of what Lena had given up still sat heavy on her shoulders every single day. The other servers at the restaurant liked her very much. They thought she was kind and hard-working, maybe a little quiet at times, but always ready to help when someone needed an extra hand. They did not know about her past life. They did not know that the woman pouring their coffee during staff meals had once played Chopin in front of hundreds of people in fancy auditoriums. They did not know that she cried sometimes in the storage room when a certain song came on and reminded her of what she had lost. They just knew her as Lena, the reliable server who hummed softly while she worked and never complained about anything. The regular customers liked her too and always asked for her section. There was one man in particular, an older gentleman who came in every Thursday evening without fail. He always sat at the same table near the window, ordered the same meal, and left a generous tip on the table. He had kind eyes behind his glasses and a gentle way of speaking that made people feel comfortable. He never rushed through his food, preferring to sit and listen to the piano music for as long as he possibly could. Lena had served him many times over the years, and they had exchanged polite conversation, but never anything more than that. What Lena did not know was that this man had been watching her carefully for many months. He had noticed the way she always paused whenever she walked past the piano. He had seen the look of longing in her eyes when a particularly beautiful piece was being played. He had watched her fingers move slightly at her sides, almost like they were playing invisible keys in the air. He was deeply curious about her, this quiet server with the sad eyes and the secret she thought no one in the world could see. And on one rainy Thursday evening, everything in her life was about to change forever. That Thursday started like any other day for Lena. She woke up early in her small apartment, made herself a cup of tea, and sat by the window watching the clouds roll in. The sky was gray and heavy, promising rain before the evening came. She got dressed in her usual black pants and white shirt, tied her hair back in its neat bun, and headed out the door to catch the bus to work. When she arrived at the restaurant, she could already feel that something was different. The manager, a tall man with thin gray hair named Mr. Chen, was pacing back and forth near the front entrance. His face was tight with worry, and he kept checking his phone every few seconds. Lena had never seen him look so stressed before. She walked up to him carefully and asked if everything was all right. Mr. Chen let out a long sigh and shook his head. He explained that tonight was one of the most important nights of the year for the restaurant. A group of wealthy donors was coming in to host a charity dinner. These were powerful people with deep pockets, the kind of guests who could make or break a restaurant's reputation with a single review. They had specifically requested live piano music throughout the entire evening. It was supposed to be a night of elegance and class, a night that would bring in new customers and put the restaurant on the map. But there was a problem. A very big problem. The pianist who was scheduled to play had called in sick just 2 hours ago. He had come down with a terrible fever and could barely get out of bed. Mr. Chen had been calling every musician he knew, but no one was available on such short notice. The charity dinner was set to begin in just 3 hours, and there was no one to play the piano. Without music, the whole atmosphere of the evening would fall flat. The donors would be disappointed, and Mr. Chen was terrified of what that might mean for his business. Lena listened quietly as he explained the situation. She felt a strange twist in her stomach, but she pushed it down and offered to help in any way she could. Mr. Chen thanked her but said there was nothing she could do unless she happened to know a pianist hiding somewhere. He laughed weakly at his own joke, not knowing how close to the truth he actually was. Lena forced a small smile and walked away to start her shift, her heart beating a little faster than usual. The afternoon passed slowly. The other servers arrived one by one, and word spread quickly about the missing pianist. Everyone was on edge, moving a little faster and speaking a little quieter than normal. The kitchen staff prepared the finest dishes they had, working with extra care to make sure everything was perfect. The tables were set with the best silverware, and fresh flowers were placed in crystal vases at the center of each one. Everything looked beautiful, but the empty piano bench in the middle of the room felt like a hole that could not be filled. By 6 in the evening, the rain had started to fall. It came down in sheets, drumming against the windows and making the streets shine like mirrors. The first guests began to arrive, shaking off their umbrellas and handing their coats to the staff at the door. The charity group was easy to spot. They were dressed in expensive suits and elegant dresses, speaking in confident voices and greeting each other with warm handshakes. Among them was the older gentleman who came every Thursday, the one who always sat by the window and watched Lena so carefully. His name was Mr. Huang, and he was one of the main organizers of the charity event. He had made his fortune in real estate many years ago, but now he spent most of his time giving back to the community. He funded scholarships for young students, built shelters for the homeless, and donated to hospitals across the city. He was a quiet man who did not like attention, but everyone who knew him respected him deeply. Tonight, he had invited some of his closest friends and fellow donors to raise money for a new music program at a local school for underprivileged children. The irony of having no music at a fundraiser for music was not lost on him. Mr. Chen greeted the guests with a nervous smile and led them to their reserved tables. He apologized several times for the lack of live music, explaining that the pianist had fallen ill at the last moment. The guests nodded politely, but there was a clear sense of disappointment in the air. Mr. Huang said nothing. He simply took his seat and looked around the room with thoughtful eyes. Lena was assigned to serve the charity tables that night. She moved between the guests with practiced ease, pouring water and taking orders and answering questions about the menu. She kept her head down and her voice soft, trying not to draw attention to herself. But every time she passed the piano, she felt its pull. It was like a magnet calling to her, whispering memories she had tried so hard to forget. She gripped her serving tray tighter and kept walking. The evening continued, and the rain outside grew heavier. Conversation flowed at the tables, and laughter filled the room from time to time. But without music, something felt missing. The silences between words were too loud. The clinking of forks against plates seemed harsh, without a melody to soften it. Mr. Chen stood near the kitchen door, watching everything with worried eyes. He had done everything he could, but it was not enough. It was around 8:30 when everything changed. Lena had just finished clearing some empty plates from one of the tables. She was walking back toward the kitchen when she passed the piano, as she had done 100 times before. But this time, she stopped. She did not mean to stop. Her feet just refused to move. She stood there, looking at the keys, feeling the familiar ache rise up in her chest. Her fingers tingled at her sides. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She forgot about the guests, and the dinner, and her job. All she could see was the piano, waiting for her like an old friend she had abandoned long ago. Mr. Huang had been watching her. He had seen her pause, seen the look on her face, seen the way her hands moved slightly, as if they wanted to reach out and touch the keys. He had suspected for months that there was something special about this quiet server. And now he was almost certain. He set down his napkin, pushed back his chair, and stood up slowly. The people at his table looked at him with curious expressions, but he did not explain. He simply walked across the room toward Lena. She did not notice him approaching until he was standing right beside her. His voice was gentle when he spoke, almost like he was afraid of startling her. He said her name softly, and she jumped a little, turning to face him with wide eyes. Her cheeks flushed red with embarrassment. She started to apologize, to make up some excuse for why she had been standing there like a fool, but he raised his hand to stop her. He looked at her for a long moment, his kind eyes searching her face. Then he asked her a simple question, just 4 words that would change her life forever. "Do you play piano?" Lena felt her heart stop. The question hung in the air between them, heavy and impossible to ignore. She opened her mouth to say no, to lie, and walk away, and pretend this moment had never happened. But the word would not come out. She stood there in silence, her hands trembling slightly, unable to speak. Mr. Huang waited patiently. He did not push or pressure her. He just stood there, with that gentle expression on his face, giving her all the time she needed. Around them, the restaurant continued its quiet hum. Guests talked and ate and laughed, unaware of the small drama unfolding by the piano. Finally, Lena found her voice. It came out barely above a whisper, shaky and uncertain. She said that she used to play, a long time ago, but not anymore. She said it was nothing, just a silly hobby from her childhood. She said she was just a server now, nothing more than that. Mr. Huang smiled softly and shook his head. He told her that he did not believe her. He said he had watched her for months, seen the way she looked at the piano, seen the longing in her eyes that she tried so hard to hide. He said he recognized that look because he had seen it before, in people who had lost something precious and never stopped missing it. Then he asked her another question, one that made her breath catch in her throat. "Would you play for us tonight?" The question echoed in Lena's mind like a bell that would not stop ringing. "Would you play for us tonight?" She stared at Mr. Huang, her lips slightly parted, her body frozen in place. The words seemed impossible, like he had asked her to fly or to walk on water. Play the piano? Here? Now? In front of all these important people? The idea was terrifying beyond anything she could describe. She shook her head quickly, taking a small step backward. "No," she said, her voice trembling. She could not do that. It had been years since she had touched a piano. She was out of practice. She would embarrass herself and ruin the entire evening. She was just a server, nothing special, nobody worth listening to. The excuses tumbled out of her mouth one after another, each one a wall she was trying to build between herself and the instrument she had loved so deeply. Mr. Huang listened to every word without interrupting. When she finally stopped talking, he simply nodded and said he understood. He told her that he was not trying to force her into anything. He said that if she truly did not want to play, he would respect her decision and walk away. But before he did, he wanted to tell her something. He spoke slowly and carefully, choosing his words like they were precious stones. He told her that he had spent his whole life around people who were afraid of failing, afraid of being judged, afraid of reaching for something they wanted because they might not get it. He said that fear was natural, that everyone felt it, but that the people who lived the fullest lives were the ones who found a way to move through their fear instead of letting it stop them. Then he said something that cut straight to Lena's heart. He told her that he could see she was carrying something heavy inside her. He did not know what it was, and he was not asking her to explain. But he said that sometimes the things we run away from are the very things that can set us free. He said that the piano was not her enemy. It was waiting for her, just like it had always been waiting, ready to welcome her back whenever she was ready to return. Lena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, not wanting anyone to see. Her chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a rope around it and was pulling it tighter with every breath. She looked at the piano, then back at Mr. Huang, then at the floor. Her mind was racing in 1,000 different directions at once. She thought about her father, lying in that hospital bed all those years ago. She thought about her mother, working herself to exhaustion just to keep their family together. She thought about the day she had walked away from music school, leaving behind everything she had ever dreamed of. She had told herself it was the right thing to do, the only thing to do. And maybe it was. But standing here now, in front of this beautiful piano, she realized that she had never truly let go. She had just buried the pain so deep that she thought it would never find its way back to the surface. But it had found its way back. It was here now, rising up inside her like a wave she could not control. Mr. Huang seemed to sense the battle happening inside her. He reached out and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. He told her that, whatever she decided, it would be okay. He said that she was brave just for standing here and facing this moment. Then he turned and began to walk back to his table, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the piano that seemed to be calling her name. Lena stood there for what felt like an eternity. The noise of the restaurant faded into the background. The voices, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, it all became a distant hum. All she could hear was the beating of her own heart and the sound of rain tapping against the windows. She looked at the piano bench, empty and waiting. She looked at the keys, black and white, and perfectly still. She thought about all the years she had spent running away from this moment. And then, something inside her shifted. It was not a dramatic change, not a sudden burst of courage or confidence. It was quieter than that, softer. It was like a door that had been locked for years finally creaking open. Just a crack, just enough to let a small ray of light slip through. She did not know if she was ready. She did not know if she could still play the way she used to. But she knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she had to try. If she walked away now, she would spend the rest of her life wondering what might have happened if she had stayed. Slowly, she set down her serving tray on a nearby table. Her hands were shaking as she wiped them on her apron. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She took one step toward the piano, then another, then another. Each step felt like she was walking through water, heavy and slow and full of resistance. The other servers noticed her moving toward the piano and exchanged confused glances. Mr. Chen, who had been watching from across the room, started to walk toward her with a frown on his face. He opened his mouth to say something, probably to ask what she was doing and tell her to get back to work. But before he could speak, Mr. Huang raised his hand from his table and caught his attention. The two men locked eyes for a moment, and something passed between them. Mr. Chen hesitated, then slowly stepped back and said nothing. Lena reached the piano and stood in front of the bench. The guests at the nearby tables had started to notice her now. Conversations paused. Forks were set down. Eyes turned toward the young server standing alone in the center of the room. She could feel their gazes on her skin like tiny pinpricks of heat. Her face flushed red, and for a moment, she almost turned and ran. But she did not run. She stayed. She pulled out the bench and sat down slowly. Her movements, careful and deliberate. The leather seat was cool beneath her, and the familiar height of the keys brought back memories so vivid they almost knocked the breath out of her. She remembered sitting at her grandmother's old piano as a child. She remembered the long hours of practice, the competitions, the applause, She remembered the day she had played her last piece at music school, not knowing it would be her last for so many years. The room had gone completely quiet now. Every single person was watching her, waiting to see what she would do. Lena placed her hands on her lap and stared at the keys. They seemed to glow under the soft lights, inviting her, welcoming her home. She lifted her hands slowly, her fingers hovering just above the ivory surface. They were trembling so badly she was not sure she could control them. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She tried to remember what her teacher had told her all those years ago. "Do not play for the audience," he had said. "Do not play to impress or to prove anything. Play for yourself. Play because the music is inside you, and it needs to come out. Let everything else fall away, and just be present with the sound." Lena let his words wash over her. She thought about all the pain she had carried, all the dreams she had set aside, all the silent years when music had lived only in her memories. She thought about her parents and their sacrifices. She thought about the little girl who had fallen in love with the piano before she even understood what love meant. She thought about who she had been and who she had become and who she still might be. Then she opened her eyes, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. The first note rang out into the silence, clear and pure and impossibly beautiful. It hung in the air like a question, waiting for an answer. Then came another note, and slowly, a melody began to take shape. It was Chopin, a piece she had practiced thousands of times, a piece that had once been her favorite. The music flowed from her fingers like it had never left, like it had been waiting all this time just beneath the surface, ready to be released. And in that moment, Lena was no longer a server in a restaurant. She was a musician, playing her heart out for anyone who would listen. The music poured out of the piano like water breaking through a dam. At first, the notes were soft and hesitant, like footsteps of someone learning to walk again after a long illness. Lena's fingers moved slowly across the keys, finding their way back to a language they had not spoken in years. Her touch was gentle, almost afraid, as if the piano might disappear if she pressed too hard. But with each passing second, something began to change. The melody grew stronger. The hesitation faded. Her fingers remembered what her mind had tried to forget, and they moved with a purpose that came from somewhere, deep inside her soul. The piece she was playing was Chopin's Ballade No. 1-inch G minor, one of the most difficult and emotional compositions ever written for the piano. It was the same piece she had been preparing for her final recital at music school, the piece she never got to perform, the piece that had haunted her dreams for years. Now, finally, she was playing it. The restaurant had fallen completely silent. Not a single fork moved. Not a single glass was lifted. Every person in the room had stopped whatever they were doing and turned their attention to the young woman at the piano. The servers stood frozen in place, trays balanced in their hands, their eyes wide with disbelief. Mr. Chen leaned against the wall near the kitchen door, his mouth hanging slightly open. He had worked with Lena for 3 years and never once suspected that she could do something like this. At the charity tables, the wealthy donors sat in stunned silence. These were people who had attended countless concerts and performances. They had heard the best musicians in the world play in the finest halls. They knew what talent sounded like, and they knew that what they were hearing right now was something extraordinary. A woman in a red silk dress pressed her hand to her chest, her eyes glistening with the beginning of tears. The man beside her reached over and took her hand without saying a word. Mr. Huang sat perfectly still, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. He had suspected that Lena was special, but even he had not expected this. The music that filled the room was not just technically perfect. It was alive. It breathed and moved, and spoke to something deep inside every person who heard it. This was not someone showing off their skill. This was someone pouring their entire heart into the keys, holding nothing back, giving everything they had. Lena was no longer aware of the people around her. The moment her fingers had found their rhythm, the rest of the world had melted away. She was not in a restaurant anymore. She was somewhere else entirely. A place where only the music existed. A place where time had no meaning and pain could be transformed into beauty. Her eyes were closed, and her body swayed gently with the rise and fall of the melody. Every note she played carried a piece of her story. The soft passages spoke of loss and longing, of dreams that had been set aside and years that had slipped away in silence. The louder sections burst forth with passion and fire, telling of a spirit that had never truly been broken, only buried. There were moments of tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of listeners, and moments of power that made hearts beat faster. It was not just a performance. It was a confession, a prayer, a cry for everything she had held inside for so long. The minutes passed, but no one counted them. Time seemed to stretch and bend around the music, making it impossible to tell how long she had been playing. 5 minutes? 10. It did not matter. The guests were completely lost in the sound, carried away to places in their own memories and hearts that they had not visited in years. An older man at one of the back tables wiped his eyes with his napkin, remembering his late wife who had loved Chopin more than anything. A young couple held hands under the table, feeling the music draw them closer together in a way words never could. The rain outside continued to fall, but inside the restaurant, something magical was happening. The storm seemed to match the music, the thunder rolling softly in the distance as Lena played through the more dramatic sections of the piece. The golden lights flickered gently overhead, casting warm shadows across the walls. Everything felt connected, like the entire universe had paused to listen to this one moment. As Lena moved into the final section of the ballade, her playing grew more intense. Her fingers flew across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed almost impossible. The music built and built, climbing higher and higher, filling every corner of the room with its sound. Her whole body was engaged now, her shoulders moving, her head tilting, her breath coming in quick gasps between phrases. She was not holding anything back. She was giving everything she had, every ounce of energy, every drop of emotion. And then, with one final cascade of notes, it was over. The last chord rang out and slowly faded into silence. Lena's hands came to rest on her lap, and she sat perfectly still, her eyes still closed, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The room remained frozen, suspended in the echo of what they had just witnessed. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if everyone was afraid that making any sound would break the spell that had been cast over them. 3 full seconds passed in complete silence. They felt like an eternity, and then the room exploded. The applause started at the charity tables and spread like wildfire across the entire restaurant. People rose from their seats, one after another, until everyone in the room was standing. The sound of clapping hands filled the air, joined by cheers and shouts of amazement. Tears streamed down faces. Strangers turned to each other with looks of wonder, shaking their heads in disbelief at what they had just experienced. It was not polite applause, the kind you give out of courtesy. It was real, raw, overwhelming appreciation for something truly beautiful. Lena opened her eyes and looked around, startled by the response. For a moment, she seemed confused, like she had forgotten where she was. Then, the reality of what had just happened hit her, and her own eyes filled with tears. She brought a trembling hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the sob that was rising in her throat. She had done it. After all these years of silence, she had played again, and people had heard her. People had felt what she felt. Mr. Huang was on his feet, clapping harder than anyone else. His eyes were wet, and he did not try to hide it. Beside him, his friends and fellow donors were wiping their own tears and talking excitedly to each other. The woman in the red dress was openly crying, her makeup running down her cheeks in dark streaks. But she did not seem to care at all. She just kept clapping and nodding her head, overcome with emotion. The other servers had abandoned their posts and gathered near the kitchen, clapping along with the guests. Some of them were crying too, shocked to discover that their quiet coworker had been hiding such an incredible gift all this time. Mr. Chen pushed himself off the wall and walked slowly toward the piano. His expression a mixture of amazement and something that looked almost like guilt for never having known. The applause continued for nearly 5 full minutes. Every time it seemed like it might die down, someone would start clapping harder again, and the whole room would follow. Lena sat at the piano bench through all of it, tears streaming freely down her face now, her hands clutched together in her lap. She did not know what to say or do. She had never expected anything like this. She had thought she would embarrass herself, that people would laugh or look away in discomfort. Instead, they were giving her something she had not felt in years. They were giving her hope. When the applause finally began to fade, Mr. Huang walked slowly across the room toward the piano. The guests watched him with curious eyes, wondering what he would do next. He stopped in front of Lena and looked down at her with the kindest expression she had ever seen on another person's face. He did not say anything. At first, he simply reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small white business card. He held it out to her, and Lena took it with trembling fingers. She looked down at the card, her vision blurred by tears, trying to make out the words printed on it. When she finally read what it said, her heart nearly stopped for the second time that night. The business card was simple and elegant, with raised black letters on thick cream-colored paper. It read the name of a woman, followed by 3 words that made Lena's hands shake even harder. Director of Music, City Philharmonic Society. Below that was a phone number and an email address. Lena stared at the card for a long moment, unable to fully understand what it meant. Mr. Huang smiled gently and explained. He told her that the woman whose name was on the card was one of the most respected figures in the classical music world. She had dedicated her life to finding and nurturing talented musicians, helping them reach audiences they could never reach on their own. She had launched the careers of dozens of performers who now played in concert halls around the globe. And tonight, by pure chance or perhaps by fate, she was sitting right here in this very restaurant. Lena looked up from the card and scanned the room with wide eyes. Mr. Huang nodded toward a table near the window, where a woman with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes was watching her with intense interest. The woman raised her glass slightly in Lena's direction, a small gesture of acknowledgement and respect. Lena felt her breath catch in her throat. This could not be real. Things like this did not happen to people like her. She was just a server who had gotten lucky for one night. Surely this was all some kind of beautiful dream, but it was not a dream. It was very real. Over the next few weeks, everything in Lena's life began to change. The woman from the Philharmonic Society reached out to her just 2 days after that rainy Thursday night. They met for coffee at a small cafe near the river, and Lena told her story for the first time in years. She talked about her childhood, her grandmother's piano, the sacrifices her parents had made. She talked about music school and the accident, and the years she had spent pushing her dreams aside. The woman listened, without interrupting, her expression kind and understanding. When Lena finished speaking, the woman told her something she would never forget. She said that talent like hers was rare, the kind that comes along once in a generation. She said that the music world had lost Lena once, but it did not have to lose her again. She offered to help Lena apply for a special scholarship that would allow her to complete her degree at a prestigious conservatory. She offered to introduce her to teachers and mentors who could help her regain the skills she had lost during her years away from the piano. She offered her a second chance. Lena went home that night and cried for hours, but for the first time in a very long time, the tears were not from sadness. They were from hope. The months that followed were some of the hardest and most beautiful of her life. She continued working at the restaurant for a while, saving money and preparing for the changes ahead. Mr. Chen, who had finally learned about her hidden talent, gave her a more flexible schedule so she could practice and attend auditions. Her coworkers treated her differently now, with a new kind of respect and admiration. They would sometimes gather near the piano after closing time and ask her to play for them, and she always said yes. The scholarship came through in the spring. Lena packed up her small apartment and moved across the city to be closer to the conservatory. The first day she walked through those doors, she felt like she was 18 years old again, full of dreams and possibilities. But she was also wiser now. She understood that life could be cruel and unpredictable. She understood that nothing was guaranteed. And she understood that every single day she got to spend with music was a gift she would never take for granted. Her teachers were amazed by how quickly she improved. Within 6 months, she was playing at a level that matched students who had never stopped practicing. Her fingers had not forgotten as much as she had feared. The music had been living inside her all along, waiting for permission to come back out. She practiced for hours every day, sometimes until her hands ached and her eyes burned from exhaustion. But she never complained. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. One year after that rainy Thursday night, Lena performed her first professional concert. It was held in a beautiful old theater with red velvet seats and golden chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. Hundreds of people filled the audience, dressed in their finest clothes, waiting to hear the young woman whose story had spread through the music community like wildfire. They called her the server who could play, the waitress who stunned a room full of millionaires with nothing but her talent and her heart. Lena's parents were in the front row that night. Her father sat in a wheelchair, his eyes shining with pride. Her mother held his hand tightly, tears already streaming down her face before the first note was even played. They had sacrificed so much for their daughter, and now they were watching her dream finally come true. There were no words for what they felt. Only love, deep and overwhelming and pure. Mr. Huang was there too, sitting a few rows back with a small smile on his face. He had become something like a guardian angel to Lena, checking in on her progress, offering encouragement when she felt doubtful, reminding her of how far she had come. She would never be able to repay him for what he had done. He had seen something in her that she had stopped seeing in herself. He had given her the courage to take a chance when everything inside her was screaming to run away. When Lena walked onto that stage, the applause that greeted her was warm and welcoming. She wore a simple black dress, her hair flowing loose over her shoulders for the first time in years. She looked out at the sea of faces and felt a wave of emotion rise up in her chest. She thought about all the nights she had spent cleaning tables and carrying plates. She thought about all the times she had walked past pianos and forced herself not to touch them. She thought about the girl she used to be and the woman she had become. Then she sat down at the grand piano, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. The music that filled the theater that night was unlike anything the audience had ever heard. It was not just technically brilliant. It was deeply human, full of pain and joy and everything in between. Lena played piece after piece, each one a chapter from her life, each one a gift to the people who had come to listen. By the time she finished, there was not a dry eye in the house. The standing ovation lasted almost 10 minutes. In the years that followed, Lena's career continued to grow. She performed in concert halls across the country and eventually around the world. She won awards and received praise from critics who called her one of the most moving pianists of her generation. But through it all, she never forgot where she came from. She never forgot the restaurant with the red walls and the golden lights. She never forgot the rainy Thursday night that changed everything. Every year, on the anniversary of that night, she returned to the restaurant and played for the staff and guests, free of charge. It became a tradition that people looked forward to, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary gifts come from the most unexpected places. Mr. Chen would stand by the kitchen door with tears in his eyes, proud beyond words. The servers would gather around and listen, dreaming their own secret dreams. And Lena would sit at that same piano where it all began, close her eyes, and play with all her heart, because she had learned something precious that night in the rain. She had learned that it is never too late to find your way back to the thing you love. She had learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward anyway. And she had learned that sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you to change the entire direction of your life. The music had always been inside her. She just needed someone to help her remember.